Okay, so let's talk about a moment in history that seems, ancient, but I promise you, its code is running in the background of your life right now. We're talking about the Reformation, and this wasn't just some dusty old religious argument. It was a fundamental rewiring of, well, pretty much all of Western civilization.
Seriously, have you ever stopped to think about it? Why is there so much pressure to be productive all the time? Or where did this deeply personalized idea of finding your truth even come from? It all feels so normal, so modern, right? But it's not. Not really.
The answer to all of that actually starts with what you could call a massive software update for society, an update that happened over 500 years ago, and it completely changed how people thought about everything, from God to their jobs to themselves.
Now, to get how huge this update was, you first have to understand the old operating system. Before the Reformation, Europe was basically running on one single centralized server, the Catholic Church. It had a total monopoly on spiritual authority. Truth was delivered from the top down, period. But, this system had its critics. For a long time, really brave people tried to debug the code. You had guys like John Wycliffe in England, Jan Hus in Bohemia, Savonarola in Florence. They all pointed out bugs in the system. They called out corruption, they demanded change, but one by one, they were silenced.
So that's the big question, right? What made Martin Luther's attempt so different? If all these other reformers tried and failed, why did his challenge finally crash the old system and force a total reboot?
Well, it really comes down to two key ingredients that the others just didn't have. First, technology. While those early guys were relying on tests that had to be copied by hand, which took forever, Luther had the printing press. And second, he had protection from a very powerful German prince who basically kept him safe.
And that brings us to the main event. This is really a story about one very frustrated monk, a brand new, totally disruptive technology, and a message that was just perfectly designed to go viral. It all kicked off because of one specific issue. Luther was absolutely furious about the sale of indulgences. This was basically the church selling get-out-of-purgatory free cards. So in 1517, he writes up his 95 arguments, the famous 95 Theses, and mails them to his boss. But then, printers got a hold of it, and his ideas just exploded, spreading across Germany way faster than the church could ever hope to contain them.
You have to understand, the printing press wasn't just for making books, it was a broadcast medium. It's been called the Twitter of 1517, and that's the perfect way to think about it. It allowed a single person's ideas to completely bypass the official gatekeepers and reach thousands of people directly.
And the core of that viral message was this absolutely explosive idea, sola scriptura, scripture alone. This meant that the ultimate spiritual authority wasn't the Pope or a council or church tradition, it was the Bible itself, and any individual could read it and understand it. This was a radical, revolutionary shift of power from the institution to the individual. Now, Luther may have lit the match, but he had no control over the fire he started. His ideas were kind of like open source code. People took them, they modified them, they adapted them, and they started their own movements all over Europe. The idea just spread and changed. Over in England, King Henry VIII broke away for his own reasons. He really wanted a divorce the Pope wouldn't give him. In Geneva, John Calvin created a much more strict, disciplined version of Protestantism. And of course, the Catholic Church itself was forced to react, launching its own massive internal reform movement, which we now call the Counter-Reformation. And as you can imagine, trying to run two completely different operating systems on the same hardware, well, it does not go smoothly. This huge disruption kicked off more than a century of absolutely brutal conflict.
And this wasn't some polite debate. The clash between Catholics and the new Protestants sparked a series of horrible, devastating wars. The worst of them all was the 30 Years' War, a conflict so brutal that in some parts of Germany it killed a massive chunk of the population.
All that bloodshed finally came to an end in 1648 with something called the Peace of Westphalia. Basically, everyone was just exhausted, and the European powers agreed to a new set of rules where individual states, not a universal church, would have the final say within their own borders. This was, for all intents and purposes, the birth of the modern world. Okay, so that's the history, but the big question is, what does any of this have to do with you sitting here right now? Well, let's talk about the legacy, because this 500-year-old software update is still running on your personal devices today. This table really sums it all up.
Before the Reformation, authority came from the top down, from the institution. Afterwards, it shifted to the individual's conscience. Work went from being just, something you had to do to survive, to being a divine calling, a virtue in itself. And truth was no longer just something handed down by experts, but something you were supposed to go out and discover for yourself.
And you can see the echoes of this everywhere. Our modern focus on individualism, that comes from this. The whole idea of public education. I mean, if everyone needs to read the Bible, then everyone needs to learn how to read. The Protestant work ethic, which was a huge driver of modern capitalism. And yeah, even democracy. Because hey, if you can challenge the absolute authority of the Pope, well, it's not a huge leap to start questioning the absolute authority of the king.
In fact, the United States is a direct product of all this. The Pilgrims and the Puritans who came over to America, they were the radical fringe of this movement. And they brought with them these wild ideas about governing themselves and electing their own leaders, ideas that baked self-governance right into the country's DNA.
So here's the real takeaway. This whole dynamic of a new technology allowing a disruptive idea to bypass the gatekeepers and challenge a huge institution, that's not new. Luther used a printing press. Today, we're just using a different kind of press. The playbook is exactly the same.
Which leaves us with one last, really big thought. The printing press was a tool that sparked a reformation that completely rewired the world. We are living through the very early days of an even more powerful communication tool. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of reformation is the internet sparking right now? And what's the world going to look like when it's done?